Me today to discuss with you Philippine island territories in the West Philippine Sea. You are celebrating today the United Nations Convention. The foundation of the UN Convention are found in two articles of the UN Charter. First, all disputes between states must be settled peacefully by negotiation, mediation, or arbitration. And second, the use of force or the threat of force is outlawed. That is why when China seized Scarborough Shoal in 2012, we did not send our Marines to retake Scarborough Shoal. We sent our lawyers to The Hague to invalidate the 9-dash line, and we won an overwhelming victory. But that settled the maritime dispute between China and the Philippines, at least legally. There is still another dispute, the territorial dispute, and that is what we will discuss this morning. And my recommendation is that we also settle it peacefully by voluntary arbitration. So the question we will answer today, this morning, is why are the islands of the Calayan Island Group and Scarborough Shoal under Philippine sovereignty when they are outside the lines of the 1898 Treaty of Paris? So if you look at the screen, you will see the Treaty of Paris lines. It's a polygonal box, but you will see that Scarborough Shoal is outside the lines, and also the Calayan Island Group is entirely outside the lines of the Treaty of Paris. In the Treaty of Paris, Spain ceded to the US all the islands within the treaty lines. So why do we say that we have sovereignty over Scarborough Shoal and the Spanish? The greatest misconception in Philippine history is that Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the 1898 Treaty of Paris lines. This is factually, legally, and historically false. But the world seems to know that, or to have been taught by everybody that Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. We will debunk this here. We will show that it is false and that Philippine territory is not limited to the islands within the treaty lines. So, in 2009, our former Solicitor General Estelito Mendoza wrote in the PhilJud Journal, that's the official journal of the Philippine Judicial Academy under the Supreme Court, and he said that it must be remembered that the Calayan Island Group came to be part of the Philippines only upon the enactment on June 11, 1978 of PD 5096. So he's saying that the Calayan Island Group became part of the Philippines only in 1978. The Calayan Island Group has never, through the centuries of its existence, been regarded as part of Philippine archipelago. This is actually false. But the Chinese have been citing this article every time they say that we don't have sovereignty over Scarborough Shoal and the Calayan Island Group. And Father Joaquin Bernas, the longtime dean of the Ateneo Law School, in his column in the Philippine Inquirer of May 2012, he wrote that, referring to Scarborough Shoal and the Calayan Island Group, he said, "We are claiming land areas that are outside the lines drawn by the Treaty of Paris." He said, "We cannot claim that because those islands were not part of the Treaty of Paris. The challenge for us is to justify our claims under the present state of international law." But in 2012, he could not point to any principle of international law that we could use to claim Scarborough Shoal and the Calayan Island Group. And also, if you go to the YouTube, the internet, you will find this video of former Senate President Enrile, who is now the Chief Presidential Legal Counsel of President Marcos Jr. He said, alam mo yung Scarborough, hindi sa atin yun. Squatter lang tayo doon. It's outside the Treaty of Paris. So he said that last May 2011. So because of these statements of our legal luminaries, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in a major policy speech before diplomats from all over the world at CSIS in Washington, D.C., that's the leading think tank in Washington, D.C. Wang Yi said, there are 3 treaties that stipulate Philippine territory. You have the 1898 Treaty of Paris, the 1900 Treaty of Washington, and the third, the 1930 with the British, demarcating our boundary in southern Philippines. Areas in the west of 180 degrees east longitude do not belong to the Philippines. Nangsha, the Spratlys, and Wangyan Island, Scarborough Shoal are all in the west of 118 degrees east longitude. And he spoke before diplomats from all over the world last February 2016. And he flashed this on the screen. And you will see, this is the 118 degrees east longitude. Scarborough Shoal is outside, the entire Spratlys are outside. So Wang Yi said, these island territories do not belong to the Philippines. This is totally wrong, and we will have to correct that, and we will correct that now. So even the foreign legal scholars, it pains me to read these articles in law journals abroad. They say that the Philippines is the weakest claim legally because we cannot point to any treaty where the islands of Scarborough Shoal and the client group were transferred to us. So these foreign legal scholars keep on saying that the Philippine government, neither the Philippine government nor its leading academics have come out with a theory that these islands, Scarborough Shoal and the client group, were ceded to the U.S. by Spain in the 1898 treaty or in any other treaty. There's no other treaty ceding these island territories to the U.S. or to the Philippines. So the challenge for the Philippines is to come up with a theory that when these islands were terra nullius means land that has not been claimed by anybody, any country, that before any other country claimed it, we were the first to claim it. And we have not done that up to now. So this is the criticism of foreign legal scholars. And just last month, a certain Professor Victor Gao from the Center for China and Globalization came to Manila. And before a Filipino audience, Filipino-Chinese audience, he said, the interpretation of the 1898 Treaty of Paris is that only the territory within the treaty lines were ceded. And Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys were outside the line. So the Philippines has no jurisdiction, no sovereignty over these islands outside the treaty lines. He again repeated, this is totally false, and it's time that we should show the world that this is totally wrong. Unfortunately, no Filipino stood up when Professor Gao stated this, mentioned this before his Filipino audience. So my advocacy is to explain to the Filipino people why we have sovereignty over Scarborough Shoal and the Klein Island Group, despite the 1898 Treaty of Paris. So we start with the 1935 Constitution of the Philippines. This defines our territory. It says there, Philippine territory is defined in 3 treaties. The Philippines comprises all the treaties ceded to the U.S. by Spain in the Treaty of Paris of 1898, that is first treaty, together with all the islands embraced in the treaty concluded at Washington. That's the 1900 Treaty of Washington. And the third is the treaty concluded between the U.S. and the United Kingdom in the 1930 boundary treaty separating Southern Philippines and British North Borneo. So, these are the three treaties that define Philippine territory. And surprisingly, China also points to this. China points to this Article 1, Section 1 of the 1935 Philippine Constitution. Your territory is defined in this article of your 1935 Constitution. And your territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. So we agree with China. Yes, Philippine territory is regulated, defined in this provision of the 1935 Constitution. We both agree. But where is the dispute? The dispute is in the second treaty, together with all the islands embraced in the Treaty of Washington. There was a second treaty, and that second treaty says Philippine territory includes islands outside the treaty lines. The Chinese kept on repeating this everywhere, in their website, in the Manila embassy, in their foreign ministry website in Beijing, in their publications. They keep on saying Philippine territory is governed by these provisions of the Philippine Constitution. We agree completely. But China did not read anymore the second treaty. They just relied on what our public intellectuals have been telling the world. But let us go dig deeper so we will know what is the meaning of the Treaty of Washington. There is a third treaty, the Treaty of 1930 between the US and UK, which demarcated our boundary in southern Philippines. So we drill down to the three treaties. The 1898 treaty says Spain ceded to the US the archipelago known as the Philippine Islands, lying within the following line. So correct. Philippine territory under the Treaty of Paris referred only to the islands within the treaty lines. But when the Americans came here, after signing the Treaty of Paris, they found out there were many islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines. In Batanes, Scarborough Shoal, the Spratlys, and also Cagayan de Sulu and Cebuto. So they went back to the Spaniards. Hey, let's sign a second treaty to clarify that all these other islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago were also ceded to us. It took some time, but they finally signed a second treaty, the 1900 Treaty of Washington, which says expressly, Spain also ceded to the U.S. any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines of the 1898 Treaty of Paris. It's very clear. Philippine territory includes all other islands of the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines. But we have forgotten this second treaty. When Philippine territory is taught, even in law schools, nobody teaches why there was a second treaty. There was a second treaty, and we have forgotten about it. Our historians have forgotten about it. So let us familiarize ourselves with the second treaty, the 1900 Treaty of Washington. And in fact, the 1930 treaty with the British defines Philippine archipelago as the territory acquired by the U.S. from Spain in the Treaty of Paris of 1898 and the Treaty of Washington of 1900. Now, a treaty is part of our domestic law. So there is a domestic law of the Philippines defining the Philippine archipelago. the territory acquired by the US from Spain in the 1898 Treaty of Paris, including the territory acquired by the US from Spain in the Treaty of Washington. We forgot about the Treaty of Washington. We only mentioned the Treaty of Paris. And that has misled the world, misled everybody. But actually, we have a second treaty. Why are these treaties important? The treaties are important because of this very strong principle of international law, uti possidetis juris. Roughly translates to English, as you possess under the law, stay there. If you look at the map of Africa and South America, you will see that the boundaries of these countries are drawn in straight vertical and straight horizontal lines. When the colonial powers drew the boundaries, they just drew it on a table survey. They didn't actually go to the land areas. So one tribe may actually be divided. They may be living on both sides of the boundary, in country A and in country B, the same tribe. But during the colonial era, nobody minded because the colonial powers respected. They did not claim territory. They just followed the boundary line. But when these countries became independent, country A will try to get their people living on the other side of the boundary. Country B will do the same. There will be perpetual boundary wars. So international law developed this principle, a very strong principle, to preserve peace and stability in all regions of the world. Countries must follow the principle of uti possidetis juris, which means the boundaries established by the colonial powers for their colonies as these colonies became independent shall be respected by all states. They are sacrosanct. All states must respect those boundaries. You cannot claim members of the tribe on the other side of the boundary to preserve peace and stability. And that's why more or less boundary wars have been kept to a minimum. And this principle of uti possidetis juris applies to the three treaties that define Philippine territory, because our Philippine territory has been defined in three treaties by our colonial masters, by Spain and the US in two treaties, 1898 Treaty and the 1900 Treaty, and between US and the UK on our southern boundary. So these treaties bind the successors to those treaties, the successor states, and the states that entered into the treaties, and the rest of the world, unless a country objected to these treaties. And nobody objected to these treaties up to now. Even China has not objected. China, you go to the website in the embassy here and in their foreign ministry, they cite our 1935 constitutions, which defines our territory under three treaties. So the question now for us is, what are the islands of the Philippine archipelago? Where do we find that map? Where is the document that says these are the islands of the Philippine archipelago, which would be governed by the uti possidetis juris principle? I have here the map of 1875, which I'm giving to your school. This is the map that shows the islands of the Philippine archipelago lying within and outside the lines, because this is the most detailed and most complete map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. It was so detailed and complete that the Americans adopted it as the map of the Philippine archipelago. So two colonial powers agree that Philippine territory is depicted in this map. But we have forgotten about this map, and we will try to reacquaint ourselves familiarize ourselves with this map. So, what are the islands of the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines? Well, we go back to history, 1734. This is the first official map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. For the first time in our history, we had a map of the Philippines, and this is the first map. And it shows Scarborough Shoal is here. It was first called Panakot, a Tagalog word which means danger, because if you don't know where Panakot is, you will hit the rocks of Panakot, your ship will run aground, and that is what happened to a British tea clipper ship called Scarborough. It ran aground on Panakot, and European cartographers renamed the shoal Scarborough. And it also shows Los Baos de Paragua. Paragua is the old Spanish name of Palawan. Los Baos means the shoals. The shoals of Palawan, the shoals of Paragua. The shoals of Paragua are the Spratlys. And this is how cartographers in the 1700s depicted shoals. And why is this an official map of Philippine territory? Because of this cartouche. That is the symbol of the crown of Spain. If you see this symbol in the cartouche of a map, that is an official map of Spanish territory in that part of the world. Because King Philip V of Spain instructed Governor General Tamon here to make a map of Philippine territory, and Governor General Tamon commissioned a Jesuit priest, Father Pedro Murillo Velarde, who made this map. And this is the map of 1792 showing a hydrographic survey of Scarborough Shoal. In 1792, Alessandro Malaspina came to the Philippines. He was the head of the Spanish scientific expedition that went around the world to collect specimens of flora and fauna, and he came here for that purpose. At that time, in the late 1700s, there was a great race among the three great naval powers, United Kingdom, France, and Spain. They sent their ships around the world to collect specimens of flora and fauna and to chart the waters of their overseas territories. The UK sent Captain Cook, France sent Laperouse, and Spain sent Malaspina. So Malaspina came to Manila in 1792, and what he did was he went to Scarborough Shoal, because in 1748 the British tea-clipper ship ran aground on Scarborough, and it became famous in Europe. So when he arrived here, Malaspina said, let's go to Scarborough, and they conducted the first ever hydrographic survey of Scarborough Shoal. What is a hydrographic survey? You drop a metal attached to a thin rope. This is it. This is the plummet. This is a lead attached to a thin wire. You drop it to measure the depths of the waters around the rocks of Scarborough Shoal. So that if you have the depths of the waters, you can guide navigators, so that navigators will avoid the fate of Scarborough. They will not run aground. So that's what he did. He went there, conducted the first ever survey, hydrographic survey of Scarborough Shoal. China didn't even know that such a shoal existed at the time. And so, this is a very important document. Why? We will explain that later. Because of this. This is the second official map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. And this is a map, this is the first part of the map. And this is the entire map. And this is a very unique map because here, Scarborough Shoal, it's the only geologic feature in the map that has a hydrographic survey. The survey of Malaspina was inserted here. All the rest of the country has no hydrographic survey. Only a tiny rock above water high tide has a hydrographic survey. All the rest of the country has no hydrographic survey. Why? Because of this fellow named Joseph Espinosa. He was the director of the Dirección Hidrografía, that's the equivalent of the Maria, the mapping agency of Spain at that time. He was actually with Malaspina when Malaspina came to the Philippines, and he was the map maker, the charterer of Malaspina. He actually made the map of 1792, the hydrographic survey of Scarborough Shoal. So when he became director of the Dirección Hidrografía, the mapping agency, and the agency made the second official map of the Philippines, he inserted the map that he made, the survey that he made of Scarborough. So it's very unique because in this entire map, only one shoal, a tiny shoal of 2-3 meters above water at high tide, has a hydrographic survey. And in this map, you will see parts of the Spratlys already appearing, but not yet complete because the Spaniards were still going to the Spratlys and conducting surveys. Now we come to the third official map of Philippine territory, the 1875 Carta General del Archipelago Filipino, the most complete and most detailed map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. That's the map here. And it shows Scarborough Shoal with a survey of Malaspina, and the entire Spratlys are here with names and depth soundings, and the entire Philippine archipelago has depth soundings because the author of this map is a fellow named Claudio Montero. He was the first chair of the Philippine Hydrographic Commission during the Spanish regime. He had 2 ships that went, steamboats that went around the country conducting depth soundings, dropping that lead, measuring the depths around the waters of Iraq. And you will see here depth soundings all over the Philippines. So this is the most complete and detailed map of Philippine territory. When the Americans came here, the map that they hurriedly made and which they attached to the Treaty of Paris of 1898 turned out to be wrong, very wrong. So the Americans adopted this map. So you will see here, War Department Adjutant General's Office, 1901 edition, because the Americans reissued this 4 times. War Department, that is the Defense Department of the U.S. President Trump renaming it now again back to War Department. So during the U.S. regime, American regime, this was the map of Philippine territory. And as I said, the Americans issued this in 4 editions, 1899, 1900, 1901, and 1902. They just added the telegraph lines, cable lines, military districts, but exactly the same map. So 2 colonial powers agreed that this is the map of the Philippine archipelago. Spain and the US both agreed that this is the territory, this is what constitutes the Philippine archipelago. So in the 1920s, 1930s, if you visited a Philippine government office, you will most likely see this map shown. Certainly in all US military offices here in the Philippines, you will see this map. Because that is the map of the Philippines, issued by the War Department, the department to which the US military belonged. So this was all over the country, but we don't have an original copy of this map anymore. The Philippines, we have forgotten about this map, so I talked to the US Embassy. I said, you have to give us an original print of this map because that is the title of the Philippines. If you own a house and lot, what is your proof of ownership? Your Torrens title. This map is the proof of our ownership of the Philippine archipelago because two colonial powers adopted this as a map of Philippine territory officially. But we don't have a copy. So the Americans gave to the Department of Foreign Affairs a copy, but only a reproduction at the back. They said this is a copy of the original on file with the U.S. War Department, with the U.S. Department of Defense. So we still don't have a copy of our Torrens title of the Philippine archipelago. So if you go to this map, this is the edge of Philippine territory in the 1875 map. You will see here Tito. Tito is Pag-asa, the largest island that we occupy, 37 hectares. This is Loita, the second largest island that we occupy in the Calayan Island group. It's about 8 hectares. And this is Ituaba, the largest island, about 47 hectares, presently occupied by Taiwan. So this is the edge of Philippine territory in the 1875 map, the official map of Philippine territory under the Spanish regime and under the American regime. So if you look at Scarborough Shoal in 3 maps, this is the Scarborough Shoal in the 1734 Murillo Velarde map. This is the 1808 Carta General, the second official map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. You will see here the survey of Malaspina. And this is the 1875 Carta General. You will see a Bajo Masinloc or Scarborough with depth soundings. China does not have a map like this. And if you go to the Spratlys, this is the present-day map of Nambria showing the Calayan Island group. All the islands within these polygonal lines, we are claiming all the high tide features and the 12 nautical mile territorial sea. So these are the polygonal lines of PD 5096. We have amended PD 5096 with the Republic Act 9522. We are claiming only high tide features, not the entire area. So if you compare that with the 1875 Carta General, this is Pag-asa, this is Pag-asa. This is the edge of Philippine territory under the present Nambria map. This is Loita, that is Kota, is there. And this is Ituaba, we call that Ligao. More or less they coincide. And this is the edge of our EEZ, and this is the edge of our territory in the Calayan Island group. So, more or less, they coincide. So, in the Treaty of Paris, Spain ceded to the U.S. the Philippine archipelago consisting of the islands lying within the following line. Only the islands within the lines. Spain paid $20 billion by the U.S. for that. And that Treaty of Paris actually had a map attached to it. And this is the map. If you look at the map, the lines turn sharply to the left as you reach Palawan to include most of the Spratlys. Turn sharply to the right to include the territory of the Sultan of Sulu in Sabah. So when the U.S. Senate approved the Treaty of Paris, they were looking at this map that was attached to the Treaty of Paris. But there was a problem with this map because there was a map attached to the Treaty of Paris, but in the text of the treaty, the geographical coordinates of the lines were also stated. Longitude, latitude, longitude, latitude. And if you connect all those longitude, latitude in the text of the treaty, the treaty lines don't turn sharply to the left as you reach Palawan. It slants downward to totally exclude the Spratlys, turn sharply to the right to exclude Cagayan de Sulu and Cebuto. So there was a big variance between the map and the text of the treaty. And if there's a variance, it's the text that will prevail. So what happened was when the Americans came here, after signing the Treaty of Paris, the Spanish garrison in Cagayan de Sulu and Cebuto refused to vacate. They said, we're not part of the session. If you draw the lines, we're outside the lines. You see, the Spaniards knew that there was a variance between the text and the map, but they kept quiet. They said, after it's signed, do not vacate because you are not part of the session. And so the Americans had to go back to the Spaniards. Hey, there are other islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines. Let's sign a treaty to clarify. So in the negotiation, the U.S. Secretary of State wrote the ambassador of Spain in Washington. He said, when we signed the Treaty of Paris of 1898, our intention was that all the territorial sovereignty and title of Spain in that part of the Pacific should be ceded to us. The entire archipelago, everything that fell under the title and possession of Spain should have been transferred to us. So that was the argument of the Americans. And the Spaniards replied. This is the note verbal. The Spaniards said, we lost the war. We had no recourse but to sign what you dictated to us. And therefore, what are excluded from those lines remains under the sovereignty of Spain. So there was an exchange, acrimonious exchange of notes verbal. Finally, the Americans got fed up, said, okay, we'll pay you an additional $50,000 to sign a clarification. $50,000. The Spaniards said, no, that's too little. The Americans doubled it to $100,000, and the Spaniards said, yes, we will sign. So there was an agreement to sign a second treaty, and the Spanish ambassador in Washington sent this communication to his boss in Madrid. There is only one article in this treaty, one of the shortest treaties in the world. And it is drawn in such a manner as to include other islands outside the limits of the Treaty of Paris. This will include all other islands. And that's exactly what the treaty says. The treaty says, Spain also ceded to the U.S. any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines, as if they have been expressly included within those lines when the 1898 Treaty of Paris was signed. So that's it. There was a second treaty that ceded also to the U.S. any and all islands. When you say any and all islands, no exception. Any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago. So the question is, where is that document, where is that map which shows these are the islands of the Philippine archipelago? So there was a meeting of the minds. We are clear what Spain ceded was the islands within and outside the lines. But where is that map? Where is that document? We go back to the maps, the official maps of Philippine territory. You have the 734 Murillo Velarde map, the 1808, and finally the map that is the most detailed, most complete, and the map that both Spain and the US agreed showed the Philippine archipelago, depicted the territory of the Philippine archipelago. So this is really the most important map of the Philippines. We don't have a copy of this map. And this map will resolve this West Philippine Sea dispute over Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys. So as I said, the US, when they arrived here, the map that they made, which they attached to the 1898 Treaty of Paris, turned out to be totally wrong. So they discarded that and they adopted the 1875 map. They issued it 4 times, 1899 after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, 1900 before the signing of the Treaty of Washington, 1901 after the signing of the Treaty of Washington, and 1902, the last. So the Americans and the Filipinos at the time, during the colonial government, were so familiar with this map. We have forgotten this map. We have forgotten the map that shows the entirety of the Philippine territory. And we have been telling the world Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. So let us get reacquainted with this map. That's why I've been distributing this map all over the country, because that is really Philippine territory. And whoever says to us that Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines, we just show them the Treaty of Washington and this map. In 1938, the Philippines was already run by the Commonwealth government. They are Filipino citizens, but we're still under the sovereignty of the US. And at that time, our leaders, national leaders, really had a good foresight. They said, some country might claim Scarborough Shoal. Let us put a marker there, let's put a lighthouse. But somebody said, oh, if you look at the treaty lines, Scarborough Shoal is outside. So they decided to write the US State Department to ask the US State Department, is Scarborough Shoal part of Philippine territory? Because we want to put a lighthouse there. And this is the reply of Secretary Colonel Hull. He said, because of the absence of other claims, no other country claimed Scarborough Shoal as of 1938. The shoal should be regarded as among the islands ceded to the US by the Treaty of Washington of 1900. So there you are, the first application of the Treaty of Washington. An island very far from Cagayan de Sul and Cebuto. The US said yes, because that is part of the Treaty of Washington. Any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines. That's why the Americans, I showed it to them, they couldn't believe it, but they cannot get out of this. They officially, this is an official document. And in 1927, the Governor General here, Governor General Leonard Wood, went on a trip to Mindanao on a visit aboard a steamship, and he carried with him, of course, the map of 1875. When he reached the tip of southern Mindanao, he saw an island flying the Dutch flag. And he looked at the map, he said, that island is Islas Palmas. It shows here that it is part of Philippine territory in the 1875 Carta General. Why is the Dutch flag flying? And so, that famous arbitration in international law came about. Arbitration over the island of Palmas case. Spain was the country that discovered it, put it in the map, but Spain never returned to the island after discovering it. The Dutch in Indonesia went there, and it was the Dutch that got the natives, about 700 people living in Islas Palmas at the time, to sign a pledge of allegiance, a treaty, saying we recognize the sovereignty of the Netherlands over this island. So the US and the Netherlands were in good terms, so they decided to submit it to voluntary arbitration by Max Huber. This is a very famous case in international law. If you study foreign relations, you will come across this. And so, what was the proof that the Americans submitted to the arbiter to show that Islas Palmas was part of Philippine territory? The Americans submitted the 1875 Carta General. In the memorandum of the US, pages 42 to 43, the US says, this map is both an American official and a Spanish official map. It shows that the island is part of the Philippines. And in fact, this is the map showing the territory acquired by the US from Spain in the Treaty of Paris. So the Americans submitted this map. This is the map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime and during the American regime. But what did so there it is. It's very close to Sarangani. This is Islas Palmas. The people there actually speak Tagalog. If you go to YouTube, you will see the people that are speaking Tagalog because they came from the Philippines. And their children study in General Santos because it's nearer than studying in Manado. But we recognize this as part of Indonesia today. We lost that arbitration and we follow international law, so we agreed. So Max Huber said, okay, it's an official map of Spanish official and American map, but discovery gives you only an inchoate title. To complete your title, you must show continuous and peaceful display of sovereignty. And it was the Dutch in Indonesia that showed continuous and peaceful display of sovereignty. So we lost that case. But Max Huber left us with something. He said, I'm deciding it this way because this island is inhabited. I would decide it differently if it were uninhabited. But he was very cryptic. He did not explain why. 700 people live in that island at the time. So we come to the next case. 3 years later, you have the Clipperton Island case. In Clipperton Island, France sent a naval officer aboard a chartered ship to Clipperton Island. It's an island off the coast of South America. It's totally uninhabited. There's no water there. You cannot live there. It's just a group of rocks with shrubs. But France claimed it, and the French naval officer read a proclamation when they reached Clipperton Island. So today, France is claiming Clipperton Island, and from there, the French officer went to the nearest island with the government, Hawaii, and took out a 2-inch by 2-inch advertisement. Today, France claimed Clipperton Island. That was 1858. 39 years later, Mexico claimed the same island. So France never returned to that island. It went there only once to proclaim it as its part of the French Union, and then never returned. 39 years later, Mexico claimed it. So two countries claiming the same territory, they decided to submit it to arbitration by King Emmanuel of Italy, and this is the ruling. When the fact that the island was completely uninhabited, no other claimants at the time, France was the first to claim it. Therefore, from that moment, the title of France became complete. Discovery gives you a complete title if the island is uninhabited and no other claimants. So two conditions. Why? Why is that? Because if the French naval officer went down to the island, brought a pledge of allegiance, the turtles and the crab will not sign. So it's useless to get the allegiance because there are no people there to sign. So the law will not require you to do the impossible. So the international says, if it is uninhabited and no other claimants, you're the first claimant, it's yours. And we go to the next case, Eastern Greenland. Trump is claiming this now. But in the 1700s, the King of Denmark claimed the entire Greenland. But Greenland has two zones. The eastern part is very cold. You cannot live there. And the western part is warmer. So the Danes colonized the western part. But in 1931, Norway claimed the eastern part. So two countries claiming the same territory. They decided to submit it to arbitration by the Permanent Court of International Justice. And this was the ruling. When bearing in mind that there was no other claimants when Denmark claimed it in the 1700s. And that area, Eastern Greenland, is inaccessible. You cannot colonize it. And therefore, the island of the eastern part of Greenland was uninhabitable. No other claimant when Denmark claimed it in 1700. So the title of Denmark became complete. So you have two cases affirming this principle, and this is a prevailing principle in international law. So we apply it to the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal. In 1734, Spain claimed Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys. No other claimant, Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys, were uninhabited at the time. And in the 2012 arbitral award, the tribunal said the entire Spratlys is uninhabitable. Why? Because if it rains, there's rain in the aquifer, but after 3 months, the water is gone. You cannot live there based on the natural resources of the island. So legally, that is uninhabitable, even if there are people living there, but those people get their supplies from outside. They cannot live there based on the natural resources alone of those islands. So in 1734, when Spain claimed Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys, those islands were uninhabited and uninhabitable. In 1808, when Spain reiterated its claim up to 1875, still uninhabited and uninhabitable. So the title of Spain became complete in 1734. That should be our historical and legal narrative. We go back to 1734. Nobody can beat us. We have international law on our side. We have historical basis because of the maps. But what is our theory? We base our theory on, according to Estelito Mendoza, 1978. According to Father Bernas, we still have to think of our theory. According to Enrile, wag na natin pag-usapan yan. According to the DFA, they were saying that, we are basing our claim on the claim of Tomas Cloma. Tomas Cloma came to the picture only in the 1950s. Too late. China claimed the Spratlys documented in writing in 1947 when the 9-dash line was issued. And France claimed it in 1933. So if we rely on Tomas Cloma, we cannot win. We have to go back, and we have the records. So I've been asking the government to make it official. The question is, why are we claiming sovereignty over the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal? What is our basis? We have never articulated it officially. So let us, I've been asking the Department of Education, DFA, National Security Advisor, DOJ, National Historical Commission to agree on what is a historical and legal basis. Because how can we convince the world to support us when they don't know what's our basis? We just keep on saying, we have sovereignty. But you have to explain it to the world. And we have the strongest title. So when you go to the internet, we have to change this. We have to put here lines to show the 1900 Treaty of Washington. So in the arbitration at The Hague, and this is my last point, China did not participate. China said, we are not participating, but this is our position paper. They submitted a position paper. And they are bound by that. And in that position paper, China's quoted our Constitution of 1935. They quoted Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution on national territory. The Philippines comprises all the territories ceded to the U.S. in the Treaty of Paris, and all the islands embraced the Treaty of Washington and the treaty with the U.S. and Great Britain of 1930. So we agree with that because that's our Constitution. So both China and the Philippines are actually using the same basis. Saan nagkatalo? In the second treaty. Because even our legal luminaries have been saying, all islands within the treaty lines lang ang territory natin. We have it was our mistake. But we can correct it because the records are there. So that's why I've been saying we should now decide ano ba talaga, what is our historical and legal basis for claiming Scarborough Shoal Specialist? We cannot keep on saying that's under our sovereignty, under Republic Act, so and so. But why is it? Why do we claim that under Republic 9522? We have to show the historical and legal basis under international law. So, that position paper submitted by China is what is called in law the highest form of judicial admission. Because when you submit a document, a pleading before a court, you admit something, you cannot get out of that. That is a judicial admission. And China cannot get out of that. They already admitted that Philippine territory is also defined under the Treaty of Washington. So, we just asked China, okay, let's submit it to voluntary arbitration. And that has been my, so it's very clear, Philippine territory is governed by two treaties when you define Philippine archipelago. And my recommendation is that we should agree what really is our historical and legal basis. And the moment we agree on that, let's go to the work. Let's challenge China, Vietnam, and Malaysia to submit the territorial dispute under voluntary arbitration because that is what the UN Convention says. The UN Charter says all disputes between states must be settled by peaceful means, by negotiation, mediation, and arbitration. We are now in the arbitration stage. Matagal na ito. So let us do that. And I'm happy that you are celebrating the UN Charter today because that is the way to settle this territorial dispute. That's there. That's part of international law. All dispute between states must be settled by peaceful means, negotiation, mediation, or arbitration, and the use of force or the threat of force is outlawed. So that is my remarks today. Thank you for your patience and kind attention.